Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Bandit's Betrayed Heart by Mclean. Narrated by Meghan Kelly. Chapter 1. 7 years earlier. Lucy Richardson crept down the hallway, pausing every few feet to make sure the house remained still and quiet. If she were caught, there'd be hell to pay. She came to a stop in front of Finn's door, took one last look over her shoulder, and turned the knob. She held her breath until the door clicked open. He hadn't locked it. Lucy smiled and eased into his room. She couldn't see anything except the faint glow of moonlight filtering in through a crack in the curtains. But it was enough to see Finn's form in the bed. She couldn't hear him breathing, though, and couldn't tell if he was asleep or awake.
"What are you doing, Lucy?"
Awake. She reached behind her and locked the door.
"Lucy,"
he said, his voice low, warning.
"You shouldn't be here."
"I know," she whispered. There were a million reasons she shouldn't be there. She and Finn weren't married and were not even courting. They couldn't get married, not without the biggest brouhaha Boston society had seen in a decade. Finn was not only her sister's butler, he had a murky past and a face covered in Mojave tribal tattoos. Lucy, on the other hand, was now one of the richest women in Boston, thanks to a little gold mine on her family's ranch in California. For Finn and Lucy to marry would go against everything society dictated, but for them to be together without marriage was unthinkable. But Lucy didn't care. She loved Finn. The very thought of him made her heart flutter and her breath catch. A brush of his hand made her skin tingle, and his kisses, well, his kisses obviously had the power to make her go stark raving mad, since she was creeping into the servants' quarters in the middle of the night for just one more taste of him.
"This is a bad idea, Lucy."
"I don't care," she said, climbing on the bed. Despite his words, he wasn't making any move to evict her from his room. She reached out a tentative hand and found him. Her fingers tightened in the nightshirt straining over his chest. She pulled herself closer to him, let her hand trail up his chest to where the shirt opened. When her fingers brushed across his bare skin, he sucked in a breath. She inched closer still, drew her hand up his neck to slip into his hair. With a groan, he wrapped her in his arms, crushing her to him as his lips descended. Lucy plastered herself to him, reveling in the hard planes of his body pressing against her soft curves. They'd stolen many a kiss in darkened corners, but this was the first time there had been so little clothing between them. The thin material of her nightdress and his shirt felt like nothing at all, but it was still too much. She longed for the heat of his bare skin against hers. She reached down to grasp his hip, disappointed to find that he still wore his breeches. He lifted his head when she paused, and she could see the white flash of his teeth in the moonlight.
"I thought you might wander into my room tonight."
"Well, don't you think you're a little overdressed for the occasion?" He leaned down and kissed her again, letting his lips trail across her cheek to the sensitive skin under her ear.
"No, I think it's going to be the only hope I've got to keep from ravishing you."
"If I didn't want to be ravished, I wouldn't have come," Finn chuckled.
"Ah, darling, I'd love to oblige you."
Lucy made a little purring noise in the back of her throat that surprised even her and arched into him. Finn hissed and rolled her beneath him, his lips and hands creating a torrent of sensation that was almost too intense to bear. "Finn," she whimpered, her hand straying down to the waistband of his pants.
"No,"
he said, catching her hand and entwining his fingers with hers. "Why?" she whispered. Finn dragged in a ragged breath and leaned his forehead against hers. With his body still pressed to hers, she could tell he was as affected as she was. So why was he hesitating?
"Lucy, you know things in my life are complicated right now. There are things in my past that need to be dealt with before I can have any kind of a future with you."
"I know that, but—"
"No,
he said again, leaning down to kiss her.
Do you have any idea how much I love you?
Lucy grinned shyly. He'd told her he loved her on more than one occasion, but her heart soared every time she heard those words on his lips. Finn. He brought their entwined hands up to his lips and kissed each of her fingers.
I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my life showing you exactly how much I love you. But until I get out of this mess that I'm in, I'm not free to build a life with you. I just need a little time.
And if your grand plan to put your past to rights doesn't work out, what then? Finn sighed.
That's exactly the reason I'm not going to take advantage of you now.
You aren't taking advantage of me, Finn. Finn just shook his head.
I don't want to do something we can't undo. I won't risk leaving you alone with the consequences of our actions. I love you too much to drag you into my world. Someday, hopefully soon, I'll be free to live with you in peace. When that day comes, it will be the happiest I've ever known. But until then, we need to be careful.
Lucy ducked her head against his chest, shifting restlessly against him. I know you think you're protecting me, but I don't care. I want you, so much it hurts to breathe.
I know, love,
he said, kissing her gently.
I know.
Lucy thought he'd pull back, but to her delight, he didn't. His mouth explored hers until her head swam. His hand slipped inside her nightgown, and Lucy froze. I thought you said...
I did, and I meant it. But that doesn't mean we can't do other things.
Before Lucy could ask what other things he meant, Finn set about showing her. Finn kissed Lucy goodbye, letting his lips linger against hers. Sending her away was a near physical pain, but she couldn't be found in his room. From the moment he'd set eyes on her, all he'd wanted to do was protect her from everything and everyone. Even himself, if necessary. Lucy was everything that was sweet and good in his life, though she had a backbone of steel and enough gumption to rule the world if she wished. She already ruled him, but she also had an unhealthy appetite for danger and a penchant for finding it. Finn smiled and shook his head. When he'd come to Boston, he'd never expected anything like her. Never thought a woman could affect him so. Never thought he could love anyone so deeply. He shied away from the thought. Finn had only ever loved one woman in his life before meeting Lucy. Rachel. And because of him... No, he refused to think of it. He didn't deserve happiness. Didn't deserve to love someone like Lucy, let alone have her love him in return. But if the fates were merciful, perhaps he could prove himself worthy one day. He watched her until she disappeared around the corner, the faint light from the early morning sun striking her hair and making the copper-colored tresses shimmer like a new penny. Finn closed his door and sank down on the edge of his bed, rubbing his burning eyes. The night he'd just spent loving Lucy had been the best night of his life. One he'd treasure always, no matter what happened. But it was going to make getting through the coming day extremely hard, for a variety of reasons. Finn shifted uncomfortably on the bed and finally flopped back onto his pillows. What he wouldn't give to be able to march up to Lucy's sister and declare his love. Bryn wasn't Boston born and bred. She'd started life a poor rancher's daughter. He didn't think she'd be prejudiced against them. But Bryn was the least of his worries. His employer, his other employer, could never find out about Lucy. If he knew Finn loved her, she'd just become collateral that could be used against him. Finn wouldn't put her in danger that way. He had to protect her at all costs. She couldn't end up like Rachel. The image of the last time he'd seen his first love flashed in his mind, her broken and bloodied body tangled at his feet. His heart clenched, and he sucked in a deep breath, trying to breathe through the pain that always struck him at Rachel's memory. The thought of anything happening to Lucy was unbearable. He'd sacrifice everything to keep her safe, which meant, for the moment, that he needed to stay away from her. He didn't like the plan that was brewing between his partners, and until he found a way to get out from under his boss's thumb, Lucy's association with him put her in danger. Finn was determined to find a way to get free, and then he and Lucy could be together. If he couldn't, Finn swallowed. The thought of leaving and never seeing Lucy's smiling face or looking into her deep brown eyes again striking him like a knife to the heart. There was no help for it, though. If he couldn't escape the servitude he was under, he'd have to disappear. There was no other way to ensure Lucy's safety. His boss wouldn't hesitate to hurt her in order to get what he wanted from Finn. And Finn would die before he'd let that happen. Hopefully, it wouldn't come to that, because leaving her would be a fate worse than death. Chapter 2. 7 years later. Lucy dipped her needle into her patient's hand one more time, slowly drawing the thread through until the last bit of the wound had closed. She deftly tied the thread off and snipped it with her little scissors. The man sitting before her let out a breath. "All done," Lucy said, patting his hand. "Let me just wrap this up, and then you can be on your way."
"Thank you, miss. That didn't hardly hurt at all."
"I told you it wouldn't be as bad as you feared," she said with a wink. "I'm even better at stitching than my sister, but don't you tell her I said so."
"I heard that,"
Bryn said, depositing a fresh stack of bandages on the bedside table. The man chuckled and looked back and forth between the sisters.
"Doc Oliver is sure lucky having the two of you to help him out. Why, it's almost worth getting hurt just to be able to visit with the both of you."
Lucy finished bandaging his palm and gave his other hand a squeeze. "Mr. Eddings, you are welcome to visit any time you'd like, though we'd much prefer a visit when you aren't sporting a gaping wound." She smiled, helping the sweet old man to his feet. "Now you be careful, you hear? I think you've had your limit of injuries for the month." Mr. Eddings wheezed out a laugh and went to settle his account with Mrs. Birch, the clinic's formidable housekeeper. Bryn stayed to help Lucy tidy up the exam area, and Lucy braced herself for the lecture she knew was coming.
"Richard ran into David Burrows this morning."
"Did he?" Lucy said, feigning ignorance. Bryn and her husband Richard had been arranging little meetings and outings with single men for years now, but lately their matchmaking efforts had risen to heights that would terrify a mountain goat. They just didn't seem to grasp that Lucy had no interest in marrying anyone, ever.
"Oh, don't you go playing the innocent with me, Lucy Richardson. You know very well you left that boy twiddling his thumbs all night waiting for you."
"I most certainly did not. I showed up. I just left a little early, that's all." Bryn snorted.
"You pretended to have a headache and left 5 minutes after arriving. You didn't even give poor David a chance. Handsome, from a good family. I swear, you'd find fault with a saint."
Lucy sighed. "There wasn't anything wrong with him. He seemed perfectly nice. He's just not—" Bryn's eyes narrowed, and Lucy swallowed the name she'd almost let slip out. The name she'd promised herself over and over she'd never say again. He just wasn't Finn. Bryn's face softened as she gazed at her sister. She put down the linen she'd been folding and gathered Lucy in her arms, giving her a quick hug. Then she pulled back and looked Lucy in the eyes, cupping Lucy's face in her hands. "You have to let him go, Lucy. It's been 7 years. He's never coming back." Lucy swallowed past the sudden lump in her throat. "I know. I'm trying." She stepped back out of Bryn's embrace. "It's just that—" Bryn sat down on the cot and patted the spot beside her. Lucy sat reluctantly. She really didn't want to have this conversation again. "Lucy, believe me, I know what you're going through. After Jake died, I didn't think I'd ever fall in love again. I compared every man I met to Jake, and none of them ever came close to measuring up. But then I met Richard." Bryn glanced around the clinic until she spotted her husband, deep in conversation with one of his patients on the far end of the clinic. Even then, I almost let the memory of Jake ruin my chance for happiness. Lucy opened her mouth to speak, but Bryn continued on. I know you love Finn, she said, her mouth hardening a bit as it always did when Finn was mentioned. She said she'd forgiven him for his role in her daughter's kidnapping all those years ago, but no matter what she said, Lucy knew she'd never forget it. Even if she understood his motives and no longer blamed him for what had happened. But, she pressed on, you were so young. You didn't have a chance to have a real relationship with him, and you are letting the memory of your first romance, such as it was, ruin your future. Lucy stiffened, offended at the implication that what she felt for Finn was somehow lessened by the brevity of their relationship. That is hardly fair, Bryn, especially coming from you. You married Jake when you'd hardly known each other, and you were married a scant month before he died. How long did you pine for him? Bryn's eyes narrowed. That's different, and you know it. How? How is it different? Because we didn't have the time to get married? Neither did you, if you want to point at specifics. You didn't even wait long enough for a proper wedding. You had Finn marry you, for crying out loud. It wasn't even legal. So don't dismiss how I felt, for Finn, because you are the last person who has the right to do so. I experienced more heart-pounding, soul-altering passion during my short time with Finn than I ever have with any of the men I've met since, and frankly, I don't think it's possible to feel that again. We might not have had long together, but we loved a lifetime's worth, so don't you dare belittle it. Bryn sat back, but after a moment she nodded and took Lucy's hand. You're right. I was dismissing how you feel, and I, of all people, should know that the amount of time someone spends with a loved one cannot dictate the intensity of the love. But I can't bear to see you so unhappy. I don't doubt that you loved him, but it was a very long time ago, Lucy. Even I moved on eventually. I'll always love Jake, but I found happiness with Richard. There's so much love and passion and fulfillment that you haven't experienced yet. That's all I want for you. Lucy looked down, not wanting to meet her sister's gaze. Bryn didn't know everything she and Finn had shared. She didn't know of the stolen kisses in hidden corners, all the moments spent whispering, planning, dreaming. Or of the night that Lucy had crept into Finn's room, into his bed, and had offered herself to him. Lucy turned her head to hide the blush that still threatened to rise all these years later at the memory of that night. Bryn was wrong if she thought Lucy had never experienced passion. Finn had refused to take her innocence. He'd insisted that they wait until they were properly wed, but they'd done other things. He'd spent the night showing her how he loved her in more ways than she could have ever imagined. They'd pledged themselves to each other, and then everything had gone to hell, and he'd been forced to run. She'd told him to run, told him to save himself, but she never dreamed that he wouldn't return for her. He is gone, Bryn said gently. He left you standing there in that field. If he was going to come back for you, he'd have done so by now. And with the war, well, you can't be sure that he— No, said Lucy, raising her hand for Bryn to stop. Don't say it. Lucy knew the chances were very good that Finn was dead. So many men had lost their lives during the war. So many would never be coming home. But Lucy refused to believe that Finn was one of them. She'd pored over the casualty sheets that had come in. His name had never been listed, but then she had no idea where he'd been, or even what side he'd been fighting for. For all she knew, he might have been fighting for the South. Or he might have gone to Europe to escape the conflict. Or perhaps he'd gone back to California and made amends with the Mojave tribe who'd raised him. Bryn was right. Dead or alive, Finn was never coming back. He'd gone back on all his promises, chosen to leave her, and he'd made damn sure she'd never find him. So why couldn't she let him go? Find another man who could make her happy, who she could share her life with, have children with, grow old with. She'd tried, she really had, but no one ever measured up. and she'd rather grow old alone, the spinster aunt to her sister's children, than live in a joyless marriage just for the sake of being married. Bryn watched Lucy for a moment and then gave her a quick one-armed hug.
"All right, I'll let it drop for now."
Lucy rose gratefully and went about her work, hoping her sister had forgotten.
"Wait a minute."
No such luck.
"If you left David minutes after arriving at the theater, where were you all night? You didn't come home until well after midnight."
"I went for a ride in the park." Bryn's gaze darted around, and she leaned in closer so only Lucy would hear her hiss. "Lucy, you didn't." Lucy put on her most innocent expression. With the war a year behind them, life was returning to normal, but there were still those who needed help. Those the sisters could assist in secret, leaving small gifts of goods or money when no one was looking. Bryn didn't mind Lucy riding off on those missions. She even helped as often as she could. But during the war, when times were hard and many were suffering, Lucy had found occasion to resurrect her old bandit persona in order to met out a different sort of help. Bryn did not approve of Lucy's vigilante style of justice. Lucy was always careful, but she was never one to turn away from a person in need. And if that meant trussing up a few bad characters before they could get away with their crimes, then Lucy didn't see the harm in it. Bryn, however, disagreed. But Bryn had done more than that in her day, so she could hardly protest too much, and Lucy heartily needed something to bring a little excitement into her life. She was happy working in her brother-in-law's clinic and helping to look after her nieces and nephews, but a girl had to do something to get her blood pumping every now and then. "Lucy," Bryn hissed again. "I was careful. Don't worry." Before Bryn could really get into her browbeating, Mrs. Birch escorted another patient into the exam area. Lucy took the opportunity to escape her sister and rushed to help the man to a cot. "This isn't over," Bryn whispered to her as Lucy got the man settled. "We'll discuss it at home." Lucy smiled over her shoulder at Bryn, ignoring her sister's glare, and turned her attention to the man before her. "Hi there," she said, smiling. "What can we do for you today?"
"Well, ma'am, I fell crossing the road yesterday. Landed on my arm hard. It always acts up a bit now and then since the war."
Lucy nodded her head sympathetically as she rolled up his sleeve, exposing a tangled mess of scars running up the length of his arm. "You are lucky you were able to keep the arm," she said, awe in her voice.
"Yes, ma'am. That's the right honest truth. Thought for sure the doctor was going to amputate a few times, but we hung in there."
He patted his arm with a laugh.
"Still aches like the dickens sometimes, especially when it's cold or there's a storm coming, and it seems to be a bit weaker than the other one. Can't grasp things near as well, that sort of thing."
Lucy nodded and continued her examination while he spoke. She'd definitely have Richard come look at it, though she was pretty sure she knew the problem. Still, she was only a nurse, not a doctor, and not even a properly trained one at that. When the war hit, Richard had expanded his clinic, taking in as many wounded as he could. Bryn and Lucy had gotten a crash course in nursing, though Bryn had already been helping in the clinic. By the time the war ended, they were both fair nurses. Lucy helped full-time most days, though Bryn didn't spend as much time in the clinic as she used to. Coraline was almost in her teens and becoming quite a handful, and her younger brother and sister were keeping Bryn very busy. With the war over and the demands on Bryn's attention lessened, she was spending as much time as she could with her children. "Well, Mr.
Watley."
"Mr. Watley, I'm fairly certain you've sprained your arm. I'll have the doctor come take a look to be certain, but as far as I can tell, you haven't broken it."
"Well, that's a blessing, miss."
Lucy smiled kindly at him and looked up to catch Richard's eye. He nodded and held up a finger, indicating he'd be a minute. Lucy settled into the chair by the cot. "Where were you when you were injured?"
"You'll have to be more specific, miss."
Mr. Whatley said with a laugh. "Your arm." Lucy laughed along with him. It felt good to laugh again, and she was glad Mr. Whatley could have a good sense of humor about it. A rare gift under the current circumstances, for certain.
"Ah, my poor arm. Well, that one happened in the Battle of Cedar Creek. Cannon blast hit the wagon I was hiding behind, blew it to bits, most of which ended up in my arm."
"Oh, I'm so sorry. How awful."
"Not at all, miss,"
he said with a huge grin.
"This arm,"
he patted it fondly,
"saved my poor face from taking the full brunt. Only one little sliver caught me, just here."
He turned his head to show her a thin, jagged scar running up his jawline to his ear.
"Yes, ma'am. I've got a good arm here, that's for certain."
Lucy smiled, amused at the man's fondness for his arm. He spoke of it as if it were a beloved pet, and she applauded his ability to find a way to be happy over his troubles. "Well, we'll have to make sure we take good care of that arm, then. You were lucky indeed to have it with you that day."
"Oh, yes, ma'am, that's for certain. Even more lucky that I had fish with me."
"Fish?" Lucy said, almost afraid to ask. "You had a lucky fish with you?"
"Ha!"
Mr. Whatley chortled so hard his face turned bright red.
"Ha, bless you, miss. Not a real fish, a man."
"A man named Fish?" Mr. Whatley was still chuckling.
"Well, that's what we all called him. A right good soldier he was. Fearless. Always running off on crazy missions, like he had a death wish or something, only nothing ever touched him. Oh, he was wounded a time or two. I don't think a man alive escaped without some sort of damage or another, but nothing ever bad enough to slow him down. Not Fish. Never seen a man like him. Saved my life more than once, and my ugly mug a time or two as well."
Lucy smiled and patted Mr. Whatley's hand. "You are lucky indeed to have him." Richard came over and introduced himself, quickly getting to work wrapping the arm that was, as Lucy had suspected, sprained. Lucy kept up her conversation with Mr. Whatley to help distract him from any discomfort he might be feeling. "Why did you call your friend Fish, Mr. Whatley?"
"Oh, well, because that's what he looked like."
Lucy grinned. "He looked like a fish? How so?"
"Oh, you'd never seen a man like him before, miss. I can promise you that. He'd probably frighten the wits out of a gentle thing like you. Used to fair scare them graybacks when he'd go running at them, all fierce and furious. You've never seen a thing like it."
"Well, a fierce warrior doesn't sound much like a fish to me," Lucy said, helping Mr. Whatley to stand once Richard had finished with his arm. Mr. Whatley chuckled again.
"It was them lines he had on his face."
Lucy stopped short. The blood rushed from her face, leaving it ice-cold and frozen. She could see Mr. Whatley looking at her with concern, but couldn't force a reassuring smile to save her life. Her head felt curiously light, as if it would float off at any second. But her heart pounded so hard it hurt, each beat a painful stab to her chest. "He had lines on his face?" she heard herself ask, though she had no conscious thought to speak.
"Yes, miss. Here now, are you all right? Doctor?"
"Lines, marks, 2 T-shaped marks just here?" she asked, pointing to her cheekbones.
"That's right, miss. How did you know?"
"And more lines? 5 lines going from his lower lip to his chin?"
"Yes, miss. Always looked a bit like fish gills, I thought. And then with his name, Fish just fit."
"His name? A fish name?"
"What is it?"
Richard asked, having come at a run at Mr. Whatley's call.
"Lucy, what's wrong?"
Richard grasped her arm, bending over her, his eyes round with concern. She pushed him aside so she could see Mr. Whatley again. "A fish name?" she asked again, her voice sounding shrill and desperate even to her own ears.
"Yes, miss. Finn, his name was. Well, that wasn't his real name, just the short version. His real name was—"
"Finnegan," Lucy whispered, black spots beginning to lick at the corners of her vision.
Yes, miss.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?